Like all government employees in Germany, you had to submit a genealogical file certifying that your paternal and maternal grandparents, your parents, and you yourself were Protestant. Your wife had to do the same, going back 3 generations. You therefore had no Jewish ancestry. The hospitals and scientific institutes received a letter from the Reich's Ministry of the Interior stipulating that they, like all public institutions, had to dismiss any Jewish or half-Jewish heads of departments and assistants. These measures did not yet concern the directors of institutions, and they only affected you at this stage in minor ways. Certain aides and lab assistants no longer showed up, for example. You, however, remained in contact with your Jewish colleagues.
At first, when you read Hallervorden's letters, you say, well done. And as a German, you can feel proud. Here is someone who did not give in to the temper of the times, who remained in touch with his Jewish colleagues in Holland, who sent them scientific journals, who, when one of them died, went to his funeral in Munich, who wrote beautiful letters to his widow. Here's a man who did not behave like most of his colleagues did at the time. Yet during that very same period, as a scientist, he was getting ready to take advantage of the crimes that would be committed.
The sterilizations began. The files were reviewed by a so-called hereditary health court, which consisted of 2 physicians and a judge. The person concerned was only informed during the hearing and was not authorized to consult his or her file. Some of your patients were sterilized, both adults as well as children. When you took the Hippocratic oath, did you not swear to do no harm to your patients? You were by now working at the psychiatric hospital in Potsdam, near Berlin. There, in the pediatric ward, you would meet a child psychiatrist named Dr. Heinze. An event that would change the course of your life. Both of you were interested in investigating the neurological causes of mental disorders. In the psychiatric hospitals, such as the one in which you worked, films were made of those patients who exhibited the most striking physical anomalies. They were deliberately presented and lit in such a way as to elicit a sense of horror in viewers. As a result of this kind of propaganda, public opinion turned against the disabled. Their parents were covered with shame and ended up feeling guilty for giving birth to an abnormal child, a child who was considered a mistake of nature. The Nazis considered disease to be a symptom of insufficient social discipline, as well as a lack of commitment to the community. Society was portrayed as a living organism that had to be protected from parasites and cancer cells. The people's community must be pure in order to achieve the ultimate goal, which was to preserve the master race. With their slogan, "You must be healthy for the people and the state," with their obsessive emphasis on youth, health, and work, the Nazis turned illness into a crime. The Third Reich needed only children that were healthy.
Everybody had to be fit, physically and mentally. There was no room for anybody else. This was not a Nazi idea. This ideology, eugenics, racial hygiene, existed long before Hitler. The eugenicists in the 1920s in particular, and even before, had already prepared the ground. The German medical profession were only waiting for Hitler so they could carry out this incredible plan to rid the German nation of anybody who was not worth living. If you couldn't perform to a certain standard, if you did not perform something worthwhile for society, then you had no right to live.
In May 1937, you joined the Nazi Party. If you waited so long to become a member, did it mean you weren't a confirmed Nazi? Perhaps. But in order to advance professionally, one had to be a member of the party. For the last few years, you had in fact been hoping for a position at Berlin Buch, at the country's most modern research center in the field of genetics and the brain. Its founder had been dismissed for political reasons, and your colleague Hugo Spatz had succeeded him as director of the institute. He offered you the position formerly held by Dr. Max Bielszowski, who had to leave because he was Jewish. And so you, Dr. Hallervorden, were named head of the neuropathology department at Berlin Buch. You were 56. This was the appointment you had been waiting for many years. Your research laboratories were now at Berlin Buch in northern Berlin. This is where you lived and worked. You requested, however, that your pathology department and its dissecting room be moved to the Gurdon Psychiatric Hospital on the outskirts of Brandenburg. You knew the new director very well.
From 1938 to 1945, the director of the Gordon Institute was Dr. Hans Heinze. Heinze was a renowned child and adolescent psychiatrist. But he was also an enthusiastic supporter of the National Socialist racial and medical policies. Julius Hallervorden and Hans Heinze knew each other from working together in Potsdam. In a letter written in 1935, Hallervorden said he was impressed by the clinic in Potsdam, which was run by Heinze at the time, because he had built it up into a sort of university clinic. And he added, "We were drawn to each other in a magical way." So here we have a direct link between clinical practice and research. Berlin Buch is quite far from Brandenburg-Gordon. Julius Hallervorden thus entrusted the supervision and management of the pathology department to an employee named Dr. Eicke. Eicke worked several days a week here in the laboratory that was housed in Building 40. He removed the brains of patients and prepared them before they went off to become a part of Hallervorden's collection.
The Nazis moved on to the next phase of their eradication plan. In the spring of 1939, Hitler gave orders to set up a program designed to eliminate people who were considered mentally or physically disabled. This operation was to be kept absolutely secret. Hitler put his personal physician Karl Brandt in charge of organizing it, together with Philipp Buhler, chief of the chancellery, who in turn appointed his deputy, the Nazi official Victor Brack, to implement the plan. Brack estimated that 70,000 people would have to be eliminated. In August 1939, an administrative structure was created to oversee this operation, and it was christened the Charitable Foundation for Institutional Care. It was set up in Berlin in a villa that had been confiscated from a Jewish family. The villa's address was Tiergartenstrasse 4, hence the code name given to this extermination program, T4. The T4 officials held the first of a long series of meetings in a room in the chancellery. 15 physicians were invited to attend. They had been very carefully chosen, and among them was your friend Dr. Heinze, who ran the Gurden Psychiatric Hospital. They were informed of this so-called euthanasia program and asked to select certain employees who might be amenable to working in the extermination centers. The last item on the agenda had to do with the possible methods of administering death without suffering, but at the end of the meeting, no method for eliminating patients had been decided on.
This conference is the first time in the whole of history of mankind where doctors were plotting to kill their own patients, completely against the Hippocratic Oath. But again, not many Nazi doctors signed the Hippocratic Oath. Karl Brandt said, "You can hang the Hippocratic Oath on the surgery wall, but nobody reads it."
A circular sent out by the Ministry of the Interior now required maternity hospitals and pediatric wards to report children under the age of 3 with any kind of malformation or mental disorder. The succinct one-page evaluation forms were read and annotated by doctors who never saw their victims. A plus sent them to their death. A minus spared their lives. And on September 1st, 1939, Hitler started the war. The last phase of Operation T4 could now be implemented. The forced sterilizations were discontinued. The process of eliminating the disabled began. At the psychiatric hospital in Gurden, as well as in other centers, children were killed first, either by injecting them with an overdose of phenobarbital or by letting them starve to death. The program was soon extended, just as covertly, to include adults.
The criterion for killing someone wasn't based on the person's genetic health. In fact, there was a form with 3 questions on it. Is this person able to work? To what extent? How long has he or she been interned? And the third question was, does he or she receive visitors and how often?
Hitler had always connected from the very beginning, as early as 1935, the extermination of the handicapped with the outbreak of war. The two went hand in hand. The pretext he used was the handicapped in the institutions were using up valuable bed space, which could be used for wounded German troops. They were costing the country an awful lot of money. For what? The document he finally signed under some pressure was accepted by most people as a legal decree. It was not.
Reich leader Buhler and Dr. Brandt are charged with the responsibility of extending the authority of certain physicians to be designated by name so that patients considered incurable according to the best available human judgment may be granted, after careful diagnosis of their state of health, a mercy death. Signed, Adolf Hitler.
It is very official and very much to the point. He doesn't waste words. He authorizes Brandt and Buhler to authorize certain doctors, chosen doctors, to select the patients who they think are the worst cases.